we continue the discussion on estate tax. Next, this topic we will now be discussing the composition of gross estate tax. So, what are those items that will be included in the gross estate? Ano yung mga kasama sa gross estate ng decedent? Okay? In your NIRC, particularly your section 85, okay? The decedent's interest. Okay? Ano tong mga decedent's interest? This includes the property owned by the decedent actually and physically present in his estate at the time of his death. Okay? So, meron mga properties bang hindi naman kasali? Meron po. Pero first, before anything else, always remember na yung decedent's interest includes those property na actually and physically present in his estate at the time of his death. Okay? Pero may mga properties na still considered as his interest even though they are not physically in the state, such as yung transfer there are actually 6. Number 1, those transfer in contemplation of death. So, kasali to sa decedent's interest. Those that are considered to be revocable transfers. Number 3, those property passing under general power of appointment. Number 4, those proceeds of life insurance. Number 5, those prior interest. And number 6, those transfer for insufficient consideration. So, we go first with decedent's interest. Okay? Again, all property owned by the decedent to the extent of his interest at the time of his death. Lahat yan kasama. This includes any interest. Okay? Kahit ano. Basta may value ito or capable of being valued or transferred. Okay? And it can be those that are owned or possessed by the decedent, okay, physical or not. Okay? Example nito yung mga example, meron siyang isa siyang partner, okay? Syempre yung partnership, kung example, karoon sila ng profits, okay? Hindi niya natanggap kasi nga namatay na siya, okay? It will accrue and it accrued before his death and na-receive niya lang to nung mamamatay na siya, okay? That will be part of decedent's interest. So, what are those that are included in his interest even though it's not physically within his estate? Number 1, we have the so-called transfer in contemplation of death. Okay? It is a transfer in contemplation of death if the decedent either has retained for his life or for any period which does not in fact end before his death. So, those that the possession or enjoyment of or the right to the income of the property or the right either alone or in conjunction with any person to designate the person who shall possess or enjoy the property or the income therefrom. Of course, we have the so-called we have an exemption to such rule, okay? In case of a bona fide sale for an adequate and full consideration in money or money's worth. From the word itself na transfer in contemplation of death, hindi po ibig sabihin nito na alam niyang mamamatay na siya. Yung general expectation, ay, lahat naman tayo mamamatay, ganon. Hindi ganon ang ibig sabihin ng transfers in contemplation of death. Hindi yung si Pedro alam niyang anytime naman pwede na siyang mamatay kasi matanda na siya. Hindi ganon, hindi yun basta-basta ganon. The word means, the words in transfer in contemplation of death mean that it is the cause of death as the controlling motive which induces the disposition of the property. For example, alam ni Pedro, ngayon uso ang COVID, diba? Na-COVID ngayon si Pedro, si Pedro 97 years old. Tapos hindi na siya makahinga. Ganyan. So, pero nakakagalaw pa naman si Pedro, pero talaga yung oxygen niya mababa na, ubo na siya ng ubo ngayon. Gusto niya nang i-transfer yung property niya baka sakaling baka kung ano pang mangyari sa mga property niya. So ngayon, he has the thought of death, and this thought is the controlling motive. Yon, that is the transfer and contemplation of death. We have also the so-called revocable transfers. Ano naman ito? Under this revocable transfer, the general rule is that a transfer is revocable. Ano pang sinasabi ng revocable? Ang salitang revocable is something that is capable of being cancelled. Kakancel yung transfer. Okay? Revocable transfer or cancelable transfer. Okay? A transfer is revocable where there is a transfer by trust or otherwise. Kung yung transfer pinagkatiwala. Okay? As an exemption is, of course, those bona fide sale in full and adequate consideration. Okay? And another one is the enjoyment thereof was subject at the time of his death to any change through the exercise of power. Okay? It can either be exercised by the decedent alone or in conjunction with another person, or when such power is relinquished or mawawala in contemplation of decedent's death. Always remember po na yung the power to alter, ibahin, o i-amend or i-revoke shall be considered to exist on the date of the decedent's death kahit na, okay, even though the exercise of the power is subject to a precedent giving of notice, or there is an alteration, amendment, or revocation. When the alteration, amendment, or revocation takes effect only on the expiration of a stated period after the exercise of the power, whether or not on or before the death of the decedent's death of notice has been given or the power has been exercised. Or in case even though if the notice has not been given, kahit walang notice, okay, or that the power has not been exercised before the date of his death, such notice shall be considered to have been given or the power exercised on the date of his death. We have the so-called property passing under special power of appointment. Always remember na there are two kinds of power, general power of there are two kinds of power of appointment under the law. It can be general or special. Okay? General power of appointment or the GPA, or the special power of appointment or SPA. Itong general power of appointment, from the word itself, it is marami. General nga, ganyan. Special, specific lang. Okay? So, when you are given a general power of appointment, it gives to the decedent the power to appoint any person he pleases, including himself, thus having a full dominion over the property as though he owned it. Pwede ring special power of appointment. Of course, he can only appoint among the designated class. Sa general, kahit sinong gusto niya. Sa special, hindi pwede. Kailangan kasali yung tao dun sa designated class of persons. And of course, yung power, it's not the full dominion. Meron lang tong particulars. Okay? Always remember, the general rule is that property passing under a general power of appointment is excluded from the gross estate. Of course, there are exemptions if it is exercised by the decedent by will, by deed, yan, ganyan. Also, those proceeds of life insurance naman tayo. The inclusion of proceeds of life insurance to the gross estate. Well, it depends whether or not it is designated. Depends on the designated beneficiary. Okay? It also depends on the revocability of the insurance, and whether it is also dependent on the period and source of funds used in premiums. Okay? Kailan ito included sa gross estate ang isang proceeds ng life insurance? Proceeds of life insurance taken out by decedent of his own life, on his own life, shall be included or kasali ito sa gross estate kung ang beneficiary is the estate of the deceased, yung executor or yung administrator, irrespective of whether or not the insured retained the power for revocation. Also, kasali ang proceeds ng life insurance sa gross estate if, when the beneficiary is any beneficiary designated in the policy, except of course when the designation is irrevocable. Next is the so-called transfer for insufficient consideration. This refers to any transfer in contemplation of death or revocable transfer or property and passing under GPA na ito yung na-discuss ko kanina lang. That is made, created, or exercised or even relinquished for a consideration in money or money's worth but is not a bona fide sale for an adequate and full consideration. Okay? Always remember that the transfer is subject to estate tax if the three instances mentioned are present. Okay? So, yung transfer for insufficient consideration should be falling either a transferred contemplation of death or a revocable transfer or a property passing under a GPA. Okay? Kung hindi present yung tatlo, okay? Hindi siya subject sa estate tax kundi sa donor's tax. Always remember po na ang capital ng surviving spouse, Section 85, Paragraph H, okay, is not part of the gross estate of the deceased spouse. Siyempre naman kasi nga surviving pa yan. Okay? So, that the capital of the surviving spouse is considered as an exclusion from the deceased gross estate. So, for example, si Pedro, may asawa siya, si Petra. Okay? Yung capital ni Petra, buhay pa si Petra, hindi included doon sa gross estate ni Pedro na namatay. Okay? Yung capital ni Petra is considered to be an exclusion. So, next topic, what are those considered to be allowable deductions and exclusions from estate? Ano nga ba tong mga to? Okay? Ano yung mga pwedeng i-deduct? At saka mga hindi kasali, magkaiba kasi yon. Syempre, pag exclusions, hindi na kailangan ilagay doon sa return. Pero pag sinabing deductions, kailangan mong isulat doon, kailangan mong ilagay para ma-reduce yung babayaran mong tax. Okay? Deductions or losses already deducted from gross income can no longer be deducted from the gross estate. So, yung mga na-deduct mo na sa gross income mo, hindi mo na pwedeng i-deduct ulit sa gross estate. Kasi nga, unfair naman yun sa gobyerno. Deduction should not be compensated for by any insurance or extrajudicial settlement. Otherwise, they are not valid deductions. There are two kinds of deductions. It can be ordinary deductions. Okay? It can also be those considered to be standard deduction. So, ordinary deduction or standard deduction. Ano nga ba tong nasabi kong deduction? Ang isa sa mga ordinary deductions is those considered to be losses, indebtedness, and taxes. Okay? Particularly those claims against the state. Nyari, may utang si Pedro nung buhay pa siya. Itong mga creditor, they can go against Pedro. So, that will be considered claims against the state. So, these claims generally means debts or demands, mga utang in pecuniary nature. So, may value, which could have been enforced against this deceased in his lifetime and could have been reduced to simple money judgment. Okay? These claims against the state or indebtedness in respect to property may arise out of a contract, tort, or operation of law. So, itong mga utang ni Pedro nung buhay pa siya, they can be considered as a deduction. Bakit? Kasi nga babayaran ng estate niya. Another one is those claims against insolvent person. Ano naman ito? Those claims of the deceased against insolvent persons as defined by RA 10142 or the FRIA, yung Financial Rehabilitation Insolvency Act of 2010. Okay? Paano makiklaim itong claims against insolvent persons as a deduction? There are two requisites. Number 1, the full amount owned by the insolvent must be first included in the decedent's gross estate. Siyempre, nakalagay dapat doon sa gross estate ni decedent. And number 2, the incapacity of the debtor to pay his obligation should be proven. How? Of course, there must be proof or instrument under oath, okay, na this person is really insolvent. Next one is the so-called unpaid mortgages. Deductible po ba to? Yes po. Mga hindi nabayarang mortgage. Ano ba to? For example, yung may mga motor sa inyo na hulugan, 'di ba? Bago niyo nakuha yung motor, pumirma kayo ng tinatawag nating chattel mortgage, na in case na hindi nyo mabayaran ng buo yan, pwedeng i-pull out ng kumpanya yung motor ninyo kasi nga hindi kayo nagbabayad ng installment payment nyo. So, paano magiging deductible ito sa gross estate? Number 1, when the value of the decedent's interest undiminished by such mortgage or indebtedness is included in the value of the gross estate. Of course, number 1 requirement lagi yan is dapat nakalagay doon sa gross estate ng decedent. And number 2, okay, the mortgages were contracted bona fide. Tunay yan dapat. Legal dapat yan in adequate and full consideration. Okay? Next one is the unpaid taxes. Are they deductible? Yes naman po. Of course, there are also requisites. Okay? Those taxes which have accrued as of or before the death of the decedent. And number 2, those unpaid as of the time of his death, regardless of whether or not it was incurred in connection with trade or business. Casualty losses are also deductible. Of course, there are requisites. Number 1 is, ano itong nasabing natin yung casualty losses? Ito yung mga, ang casualty losses are those losses that result from damage, destruction, or loss of property from any sudden, unexpected, or unusual event. Example nito, mga pagbaha, hurricane, mga tornado, earthquake, sunog, mga volcanic eruption, yung mga yan. So that it must be sudden, it dapat unexpected at saka unusual. Pero yung mga normal na wear and tear, mga progressive deterioration, ganyan, hindi yan kasali, okay? Next one, those property previously taxed. Doon tinatawag nating vanishing deduction. Ano tong vanishing deduction? Okay? In order for vanishing deduction to be deductible under the gross estate, meron yung requirement. Siyempre, there are 5. from the word itself na vanishing deduction. Pawala, wala, or it's vanishing, or pwedeng bawasan, gano'n. So, in here, there must be a death in order for it to be deductible. Kailangang namatay. In the death, the present decedent died within 5 years from the date of death of the prior decedent or the date of gift.